The moment I walked into Vivian's pristine living room that Christmas morning, I should have known something was wrong. My mother-in-law stood beside her massive Douglas fir tree, like a queen holding court, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, wearing that cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was arranging wrapped boxes with the precision of someone who'd planned every detail weeks in advance. "Margot, darling, you're finally here," she said without looking up, her voice carrying that familiar edge that made my stomach clench. My husband Garrett squeezed my shoulder as we entered with our 8-year-old daughter Indy, but I could feel the tension radiating from him too. He always got quiet around his mother, like he was 12 again instead of 38. The room buzzed with excited chatter from Garrett's siblings and their kids. His brother Knox was already helping his twin boys tear into packages, while his sister Cordelia filmed her teenage daughter, opening what looked like designer handbags. The coffee table groaned under the weight of discarded wrapping paper and expensive gifts, the kind of Christmas morning that belonged in magazines, not real life. I watched Indy's eyes grow wide as she took in the scene. She clutched the small gift bag we'd brought for Vivian homemade cookies and a heartfelt card, looking suddenly very young in her carefully chosen red dress. We'd spent weeks picking out that dress, wanting her to look perfect for family photos, wanting to belong. "Children, gather round," Vivian announced, clapping her hands together. "Grandmother has special presents this year." The kids rushed forward like eager puppies, and I felt my chest tighten as Indy hung back slightly, uncertainty flickering across her face. Something in Vivian's tone, in the way she avoided looking directly at our daughter, sent warning bells clanging in my head, but I pushed the feeling down. This was family. This was Christmas. Surely I was overthinking things, letting my own insecurities about never quite measuring up in this wealthy, accomplished family cloud my judgment. Garrett's hand found mine, warm and reassuring, and I tried to let that comfort anchor me as his mother began distributing her carefully planned surprises. One by one, Vivian called the grandchildren forward. "Devin and Dalton!" She cooed to Knox's twin boys, handing them matching boxes that revealed brand new iPads. The boys whooped with joy, and Knox beamed with pride. "Scarlett," she called next, presenting Cordelia's daughter with an elegant jewelry box containing what looked like real gold earrings and a necklace that sparkled under the Christmas lights. My heart hammered as I watched the pattern emerge. Each grandchild received something extraordinary, expensive, thoughtful, clearly planned months in advance. There were envelopes thick with cash, designer watches, even a promise of a summer trip to Europe for the older kids. The room filled with squeals of delight and grateful hugs. Indy stood beside me, shifting from foot to foot, her small hands twisted together. She was waiting her turn, trusting that grandmother would call her name next. But as the last cousin received their gift, Vivian dusted off her hands with finality. "Well, that's everyone," she announced brightly, turning away from the gift table. The silence that followed felt like a physical blow. Indy's face crumpled for just a moment before she quickly schooled her expression, but I saw it. I saw the exact second her 8-year-old heart broke. "What about Indy?" The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. Vivian turned back slowly, her pale blue eyes meeting mine with icy calm. Then she leaned close enough that only I could hear her whisper, "She's not blood, dear. Surely you understand." The room continued buzzing around us, cousins comparing gifts, adults chatting about holiday plans. No one else had heard. But those 4 words hit me like a slap across the face, leaving my cheeks burning and my vision blurring with sudden tears. I looked desperately at Garrett, waiting for him to say something, anything. Instead, he stared at the floor, his jaw tight, but his mouth firmly closed. What happened next still takes my breath away when I think about it. Instead of running away, crying, or clinging to me for comfort, Indy walked calmly to where she'd set down our gift bag. She pulled out a small red jewelry box, one I'd never seen before, and approached her grandmother with the quiet dignity of someone far older than 8 years. "Grandmother," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill, "I have something for you too." Vivian looked genuinely surprised as Indy placed the red velvet box in her manicured hands. The room had grown quieter, adults sensing the shift in energy, even if they didn't understand what had just transpired. Cordelia glanced between us with raised eyebrows, while Knox continued helping his boys set up their new tablets, oblivious. "Well," Vivian said with a forced smile, "how thoughtful." She opened the box with the casual air of someone expecting another homemade craft or piece of costume jewelry. The moment she saw what was inside, her face went completely white. Her hands began to tremble so violently that she nearly dropped the box. Whatever was nestled in that red velvet made her stumble backward until she hit the edge of her expensive sofa. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Indy stood there, suddenly looking every bit her 8 years again, confusion flickering across her features. "From the special drawer in Mommy and Daddy's room, the one with all the important papers. I thought you might want it back since it has your name on it." My blood turned to ice. I knew exactly which drawer she meant. The one where Garrett kept his birth certificate, our marriage license, his adoption papers from when Vivian's first husband had adopted him as a baby. But I had no idea what Indy could have found that would cause this reaction. Vivian's eyes snapped to mine, wild and desperate, then to Garrett, who had finally looked up from the floor, his face a mask of dawning horror. "Mom?" Garrett's voice cracked like a teenager's as he stepped closer. "What is that?" Vivian snapped the box shut and clutched it to her chest, but not before I caught a glimpse of what looked like a folded piece of yellowed paper. Her composure, usually unshakable, had completely crumbled. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool December morning. "It's nothing," she said quickly, but her voice shook. "Just old documents that should have been thrown away years ago." Knox finally looked up from his son's tablets, sensing the tension. "Everything okay over there?" But Cordelia had moved closer, her lawyer instincts kicking in. She was the family problem solver, the one who'd helped me navigate insurance claims when Garrett had his accident 2 years ago. Now she studied her mother's face with sharp green eyes. "Mother, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's in the box?" "I said it's nothing!" Vivian's voice rose to a pitch I'd never heard before. Several of the children stopped playing and stared. "Indy, where exactly did you find this?" My daughter looked between all the adults, clearly realizing she'd done something significant, but not understanding what. "In the back of the drawer, behind Daddy's papers. There was a whole envelope with your name on it. I thought maybe it was important since it was hidden." The word "hidden" seemed to hit Garrett like a physical blow. His face went from confused to suspicious in seconds. "Hidden? Mom, what did you hide in our house, and when were you in our bedroom going through our things?" The Christmas morning that had started with such promise was disintegrating before our eyes. The other adults were openly staring now, and even the children had gone quiet, picking up on the adult drama unfolding. Vivian's perfect holiday was cracking apart, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control. But then Cordelia did something unexpected. She reached out and gently took the red box from her mother's trembling hands. "I think we need to see what's so important," she said quietly. "Cordelia, don't!" Vivian pleaded, reaching desperately for the box, but her daughter had already opened it. Cordelia unfolded the yellowed paper with careful precision, her eyes scanning the document. I watched her expression change from curiosity to shock to something that looked like disgust. She read it twice before looking up at her mother with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "This is a DNA test," she said slowly, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "From 1992. It shows that Dad wasn't Garrett's biological father." The room went dead silent. Even the children stopped their chatter, sensing the gravity of adult words they didn't fully understand. Knox's face went slack with confusion, while Garrett looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "But more importantly," Cordelia continued, her lawyer voice getting stronger, "it shows who his real father is." She looked directly at me, and I saw something like respect flicker in her eyes. "It's Marcus Hendricks." The name hit the room like a bomb. Everyone knew that name. Marcus Hendricks owned half the commercial real estate in our city, including the shopping centers that had made our family wealthy. He'd been Vivian's close family friend for decades, the man who'd helped establish the trust funds, who'd been at every major family celebration. "Oh my God," Knox whispered. That means Garrett is Marcus's son," Cordelia finished. "Which means Indy isn't just family by marriage. She's Marcus's granddaughter by blood." She has more claim to this family's legacy than any of us realized. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet as the implications crashed over me. All these years of being made to feel like outsiders, of Vivian's subtle dismissals and cold treatment, of watching my daughter be treated like a second-class grandchild. And the whole time, Indy had more biological connection to the family fortune than Vivian's own biological grandchildren. Garrett's voice, when he finally found it, was barely a whisper. You knew. All these years, you knew, and you let me believe. Vivian's mask had completely shattered. Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face as she reached toward her son with shaking hands. Don't touch me, Garrett said, stepping back from his mother's reaching hands. His voice was raw with 38 years of suppressed pain. Don't you dare touch me after what you've done. The transformation in my husband was startling. The quiet, accommodating man who'd spent decades trying to earn his mother's approval was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. His shoulders straightened, his jaw set with determination I'd never seen before. You let me spend my entire life feeling like I had to prove I belonged in this family, he continued, his voice growing stronger. You made me grovel for your acceptance while you knew the whole time that I had every right to be here. More right than anyone. Vivian's face crumpled completely. Garrett, please, you don't understand. I was protecting you. Marcus was married. He had his own family to think about. If word had gotten out. Protecting me? Garrett's laugh was bitter and sharp. You were protecting yourself, your reputation, your perfect image as the grieving widow who nobly raised another man's child. Knox stood frozen by the Christmas tree, still processing. But Cordelia moved closer to me, her expression resolute. Margot, do you understand what this means legally? I shook my head, still reeling from the revelation. Marcus established the family trusts. If Garrett is his biological son, then Indy has direct inheritance rights. She's not just a step-grandchild anymore. She's a blood heir. Cordelia's voice took on that sharp lawyer edge. Mother's been collecting trustees' fees and managing distributions for years, knowing full well she was potentially defrauding Marcus's actual heir. The magnitude of it hit me like a freight train. All those years of feeling grateful for hand-me-downs and modest Christmas gifts, of watching Indy get smaller portions while her cousins were lavished with expensive presents. Meanwhile, she potentially had legal claim to portions of a multi-million-dollar estate. This changes everything, I whispered, and for the first time in years, I felt something other than intimidation when looking at Vivian. I felt power. Vivian seemed to sense the shift. Her tear-streaked face turned desperate as she looked between Garrett, Cordelia, and me. We can work this out as a family. There's no need to involve outsiders or lawyers or— Too late for that, Cordelia said firmly. What happened next still gives me chills. My 8-year-old daughter, who had been standing quietly through this entire adult drama, walked over to where I was sitting and climbed into my lap. She looked directly at Vivian with those clear, honest eyes that children have before the world teaches them to be afraid. Grandmother, she said in that matter-of-fact way kids have, you said I wasn't blood family, but I am, aren't I? More than Devon and Dalton and Scarlett. The simple truth from a child's mouth hit harder than all of Cordelia's legal explanations. Vivian's face went ashen, and for the first time since I'd known her, she had no response. That's when I found my voice. Really found it. Maybe for the first time in my marriage. You know what the cruelest part is? I stood up, still holding Indy, feeling strength I didn't know I possessed. It was never about blood. It was about control. You wanted to keep us small, keep us grateful, keep us from asking questions about what we were actually entitled to. Knox finally spoke up, his voice shaky. Mom, is this true? Have you been lying to all of us about the trust funds? Before Vivian could answer, Cordelia was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling Marcus. He deserves to know he has a son and granddaughter he's never truly known about. No! Vivian lunged forward with more energy than I'd seen from her in years. You can't. His wife, his family. This will destroy everything. Everything you built on lies, Garrett said coldly. Everything you maintained by keeping me from my real father and keeping my daughter from her inheritance. The room felt electric with tension. The other grandchildren had been quietly moved to another room by their parents, but I could hear hushed, urgent conversations happening in the hallway. The family was fracturing in real time, and everyone knew it. Cordelia's finger hovered over her phone screen. Marcus has a right to know Mother, and Indy has a right to her grandfather. That's when Vivian played her final card. She dropped to her knees in her expensive Christmas dress, tears streaming down her face, and looked directly at me. "Margot, please, we can fix this quietly. I'll make it right. I'll change the trust distributions. I'll include Indy in everything. Just don't let them destroy our family." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I looked down at Vivian, this woman who had made me feel small and unwelcome for 8 years, now groveling on her expensive Persian rug. The woman who had whispered that my daughter wasn't blood family was now begging me to save her from the consequences of her own lies. "No," I said simply. The word felt like freedom. "You don't get to control this anymore." Cordelia pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Marcus Hendricks. "Marcus, it's Cordelia. I'm at Mother's house, and we need you to come over immediately. There's something about Garrett you need to know." Even from across the room, I could hear the concern in his voice. "Is he all right? What's happened?" "He's fine, but—" "Marcus, we found out you're his biological father. We have the DNA test from 1992. Mother's been hiding it all these years." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'll be right over." Vivian collapsed completely, sobbing into her hands. Knox stood there looking like his entire world had shattered, which I suppose it had. But Garrett walked over to me and put his arms around both Indy and me, and for the first time in our marriage, I felt like we were truly a team. "Mommy," Indy whispered, "why is grandmother crying?" I smoothed her hair and chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt people, and sometimes those mistakes catch up with them. 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived. He was a distinguished man in his 70s, someone I'd seen at family gatherings but never really spoken to. As he walked into that living room and saw Garrett, really saw him, maybe for the first time, the resemblance was unmistakable. "My God," he breathed, reaching out to touch Garrett's face. "You have your mother's eyes, but everything else, you're my son." The emotion in that room was overwhelming. Here was a man meeting his son for the first time at 38 years old, and a granddaughter he'd never known existed. The family that Vivian had worked so hard to control was reshaping itself right before our eyes. What happened next was like watching 38 years of stolen time try to compress into a single moment. Marcus knelt down to Indy's level, his eyes bright with tears. "Hello, sweetheart," he said gently. "I'm your grandfather, your real grandfather." Indy, with that incredible resilience children have, smiled back. "I know. You have the same eyes as Daddy." The simple acceptance from an 8-year-old seemed to break something loose in Marcus. He pulled both Garrett and Indy into a fierce hug, and I watched my husband finally relax in a way I'd never seen before. For the first time in his life, someone was claiming him unconditionally. "Vivian," Marcus said, standing and turning to face her with a coldness that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. 38 years. You stole 38 years from me and my son." Vivian had stopped crying and was now sitting rigidly on her sofa, trying to salvage some dignity. "Marcus, you have to understand, I was protecting everyone. Your marriage, your reputation." "My marriage ended 15 years ago," Marcus said flatly. "My wife knew about the affair. We could have worked through this decades ago if you hadn't been so concerned with controlling the narrative." The final pillar of Vivian's justification crumbled. Even her excuse about protecting his family was a lie. Marcus pulled out his phone and called someone, his lawyer, from what I could gather. "David, I need you to draft emergency papers. I'm adding my son Garrett and granddaughter Indy to all my trusts and will. Yes, immediate implementation." He paused, looking directly at Vivian. "And I need you to audit every distribution that's been made from the family trusts over the past 15 years. I have reason to believe there may have been irregularities." The word irregularities hung in the air like a death sentence. Vivian's face went white as she realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about family dynamics anymore. This was about potential financial fraud, mismanagement of funds, and years of documented deception. Knox and Cordelia exchanged glances, both clearly calculating what this meant for their own positions in the family hierarchy. But I felt nothing but satisfaction watching it all unfold. 6 months later, I stood in the same living room where it all began, but everything had changed. The Christmas decorations were gone, replaced by moving boxes. Vivienne was selling the house. She had no choice after the audit revealed she'd been skimming from the trust funds for years, using Marcus's money to maintain her lavish lifestyle while keeping his real family in the dark. Marcus had been true to his word. Indy now had a college fund worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Garrett had been made a full partner in Marcus's real estate empire. And me? I was no longer the outsider looking in. I was family, real family, in a way that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with being claimed and valued. "Margot," Vivian said as I supervised the movers taking the last of Garrett's childhood photos. Her voice was smaller now, aged by months of legal battles and social exile. "I want you to know I never meant for things to go this far." I looked at this woman who had spent 8 years making me feel like I didn't belong, who had whispered cruel words about my daughter on Christmas morning, who had stolen decades of relationship between a father and son out of pure selfishness. "You meant every bit of it," I said calmly. "You just never expected to face consequences." The social fallout had been swift and brutal. Their country club friends, the charity boards, the exclusive social circles, they'd all turned their backs once word spread about the fraud and family deception. Knox barely spoke to his mother anymore, while Cordelia had taken a job with Marcus's legal team, determined to make amends for years of complicity through silence. But the sweetest revenge was watching Indy with her grandfather. Marcus picked her up from school twice a week, took her to museums and art classes, spoiled her in all the ways a grandfather should. She called him Grandpa Marcus, and the joy in his eyes every time she said it was worth more than all of Vivian's apologies combined. As we walked out of that house for the last time, Garrett squeezed my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not letting her convince us to stay quiet." I squeezed back, thinking about that moment when I'd finally found my voice and said no to a woman who'd controlled our lives for too long. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to protect someone from the consequences of their own cruelty.